Hello, everyone, and welcome to the B2B Buying Disconnect, Meet the New Software Buyer. I am delighted to have two fantastic speakers join me today for this conversation. Alyssa Fink, who was for many years the CMO of Tableau. Welcome, Alyssa. She's now on multiple boards and advising multiple companies and just has a great market perspective. And Samantha Stone, who I've also known for a number of years, who is the founder and CMO of the Marketing Advisory Network. Again, consults with a lot of high-tech growth companies and just has a great purview on the landscape. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks, Vinay.
Glad to be here.
Nice to see you, Samantha.
I know, these are things that bring us all together. So thank you for doing that.
That's right. Thank you, Vinay. That's true. And Adele.
Well, really excited to kind of dig into the conversation today. We're going to be sharing some data from our latest study, the 2021 B2B Buying Disconnect. It's a study that we've now published for the last 5 years, just monitoring buyer trends. We survey about 1,000 B2B tech buyers each year and a few hundred tech vendors to understand how they think about information sources, the buyer's journey, and see if there's a level of disconnect. So the first topic I wanted to talk about was just how the landscape has changed. And today, 60% of the buyers in our survey represented themselves as millennials. Samantha and Alyssa, what are you seeing in the companies that you advise? Is this pattern clear and evident to them?
What's really interesting to me is I think most people will acknowledge that millennials are getting into positions of authority and such, but I think there's a real misconception about what that means. I think the people still think millennials are 20-year-old, inexperienced people who are digital savvy, but not business savvy. And the reality is within the millennials, there's a wide grouping of people who have a deep amount of expertise, who are very seasoned professionals, who did grow up digitally and have some things that are different about how they prefer to buy and evaluate different types of solutions. But I think largely we forget what that really means.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, if you think about it, millennials are approaching 40 at the high end, and so there's a rich amount of experience. They're in leadership. And they're digital natives. And so they learn fast, and they've learned how, that's how they grew up, learning quickly, absorbing ideas from all over the place, learning how to have discretion about what's truthful or what's fact, what's believable, what's credible. So I think they're a really interesting audience, but a very powerful one. And that does buy differently, or does approach business problems differently from the ones that came before them, Generation X or even baby boomers.
Great transition. We do see in our data that they shop quite differently. As Alyssa mentioned, they've grown up in a digital first world. They've grown up with review platforms in their consumer experience. They've grown up with Google. A lot of the older buyers, myself included, I guess, being a Gen Xer, might rely on prior experience. But the millennials, and now actually the rising Gen Zs, are much more inclined to begin their journey with an online search. Additionally, we've known for years that analysts have played a very important role in the B2B tech sector, but the degree of likelihood to use an analyst report in the buyer's journey lowers the younger that you are. And what we've seen is a year-on-year fairly precipitous decline in the usage of analyst reports, again, as surfaced by the data in the B2B disconnect. Sam, Samantha, would you like to kind of react to kind of this data? Does it all ring true to you?
Yeah, I think there's this slippery thing that says, when do people rely on their own expertise and where do they go search? I think everybody goes out and looks for validation. I don't think there's a population today that doesn't do that. I think the question is, what's their frame of reference when they're doing that? And I think a lot of times, I think this is probably a fair representation. I'm a Gen Xer, and I probably operate this way, where I already know a set of things about a set of solutions. And now I'm going out to validate, are there new ones that I don't know about? And how have these changed from my perception? But I do go in with a bias, and I do go in with a series of expectations. In terms of analyst reports, I think one of the things that's really interesting to me is I do think they continue to play a significant role in largely ruling out people, right? So somebody will go in and they will look at that analyst report and they will say, ooh, you're not here, that raises a flag for me. What does that mean? Or they may use it. But I agree with you that it used to be analyst reports were kind of the only objective set of information I could get. And so they dominated because there really wasn't any other alternative. And now we have lots of venues like these review sites to give user feedback, not just an analyst perspective. So I do think they still play a role, and they actually are pretty important, but I think their role has certainly decreased over time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing is the older you get, the more experience you have with the product. So it's kind of not a surprise that, oh, I have experience with that product. I don't necessarily need to dig as deeply. Although, gosh, the tech world changes so much that I would warn, my Gen X baby boomer colleagues to not take anything for granted. I mean, I think you just see story after story about this entrenched software platform that is just not keeping up with the times. And you see stories about your competitors who take in a new platform, a new application, and all of a sudden they're enabled like they never have been before. So I think it's like, be aware. Yeah, your experience really counts. You know how to look at things, but be aware that the up and comer products, you kind of have to be aware of. And I 100% agree with you, Samantha, on the analyst reports. Yeah, they do tend to screen people out. And that is a red flag when you don't see somebody on there. But oftentimes it's the innovative solutions that never get there. So you kind of, again, have to be a little bit open to that. I also think 10, 20 years ago, you just didn't have alternatives. You didn't have Trust Radius. You didn't have review sites. You had your network, and maybe they were using the product or not. It was really hard to dig it up. So you had to trust the analysts. But I think that because now there's so much more information available, and the real users are telling you things that's so useful. That being said, I think there's a credibility thing that analysts and trusted review sites need to be aware of, because there are plenty of vendors and plenty of companies that try to game the system, and they pay for reviews. I mean, they pay for influence. And that's fine. You can ask for reviews. You should. If you're a great product and your customers are happy, ask for it. Be authentic. But I also think that there is some service, that there's a rigor to analyst reports, things to consider when you're buying something that maybe you wouldn't have considered if you didn't know better, that they can be of value in those things. So a more well-rounded approach, including a lot of trust on review sites and user input and, your colleagues and your network that have used it, but then looking at some of the other sources that have some measure of independence or some measure of know-how, and some measure of experience with successful implementations versus unsuccessful implementations. That can be valuable. So I think, again, looking at millennials who are so good at many different sources of information coming at them and being able to filter those out effectively, it's another strength of theirs. And so I would say lean into analyst reports and review sites and all the information you get, because these buyers are really good at being able to take that and grok it into a perspective, a well-informed perspective.
Alyssa, you made me think of something that I think is really important here, which is the question here is about analyst rankings and reports. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the important distinction that you're making, is that analyst relationship is more than that. An analyst relationship looks at big trends. They look forward at what might be coming. They might inform your whole ecosystem and how these things. So I think analysts continue to play a big role in helping both inform vendors who are developing solutions, but also customers who are looking for the full context. The role of the report, I think, is what has really shifted. And we have these other, you could argue, probably less biased perspectives that can look more broadly. You don't, at a review site, you don't have a minimum of, I've got to give 6 customer references before you could be included in a report, for example, right? Or these other things. So it's a really interesting opportunity to have multiple data inputs.
Yeah. And it's not such an event anymore. Like I remember, especially with Gartner, the Magic Quadrant was coming out. Oh my God, it's coming. Oh my God, what are we going to do about it? Oh my God, and they were so protective of how you use the Magic Quadrant in your marketing and your sales, and I just don't think it's quite the event that it used to be. And now it's like this preponderance of information that buyers have to sort out and figure out. And in a lot of ways, the more a tech vendor can help make sense of that in a way that's useful, not just trying to sell and persuade, but useful, you can really help your buyers. You can really help your buyers by having a perspective and trying to make all this information the review sites, the analyst reports, the casual things you read and social or what have you. If you can help them make sense of that, that could be a very valuable service.
That's a great transition once again.
Oh.
You're fantastic. Let's talk about what they trust. So the top 5 sources used by buyers across demographics are as following: free trials and accounts, product demos, user reviews, the vendor's own product website, and the vendor representative. In this little matrix here, we look at the most trustworthy as deemed by the buyers and the most influential. So tangibly touching a product, whether that's a trial, a freemium, or a demo, is really, really important to the buyer. Now, we've seen a trend towards product-led growth where a lot of companies are offering trials and so forth, and that's been a very important trend in the B2B tech market. Not all products are trialable, but all products are to some degree demoable. And still today, I think there's a tendency with vendors to restrict the access to the demo until someone's further on in the sales cycle, when what the buyer really wants is an early glimpse of whether the product's going to work for them. User reviews, I'm biased, obviously, being the CEO of a review company, but user reviews are really important. And my viewpoint is that because the vendor's own website is really important as well, there's a strategy opportunity to take content from reviews that's trustworthy and bring it into your own channels as well, on your website, in your communications, in your sales touch points as well. Samantha, what's your kind of reaction to these sources and how kind of buyers are ranking them from a trust and influence perspective?
I think they're perfectly logical, right? I mean, I think you make sense. What are the things that I can touch and feel and see and learn? How are people who are using those solutions responding to it? I think one of the things, and Vinay, you and I have spent a lot of time talking about this, so I know you feel passionately as I do. Ratings, like star ratings, aren't very helpful, because at the end of the day, most things have that. I mean, you sort of look at a list of features, a lot of mature solutions at least can all do the same thing. Where I find buyers really start to dig in is they start to look at what's being said. So what is the real scenario by which I've had? And so in that context, I think user reviews are very, very helpful, and it helps inform, what do I look for in the demo? What do I ask the salesperson? What should I be thinking about? Will this be important to us? Yes or no, right? Because, there's a whole range of things that might be important to me at any point in time.
I agree.
Surprise me that, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Samantha. Yeah.
No, it also doesn't surprise me that the least trustworthy place are ourselves, right? So I would like to believe, and I hope, that most people are telling the truth. But at the end of the day, we're still selling ourselves and projecting ourselves, and it isn't very, it's not fully objective, and it can't be fully objective. What I think the vendors who have a lot of strength do is they bring that objectivity to your site. So for example, you talked about reviews, but it could be other things. It could be analyst reports. It could be hosting events where we have guest experts. It's having customers speak, telling their own story. So I think the sites themselves in aggregate are probably the least trustworthy, but there are bits of pieces, if you package correctly, that are really valuable and make it easy for the buyer to find what they're looking for.
Absolutely. I mean, I often say this, it's like, especially for B2B tech, I mean, I would venture bet, dollars to donuts and many multiples to say, what person has ever come and bought your product without visiting your website? And when you think about a buying committee, okay, but as a company that buys from you, an account that buys from you, they've never been to your website, that'd be pretty unusual, I would say. So you do want to have a great website. You want to have as trusted a website as you can have. Now, people expect you to have a point of view because you believe in your product and you're selling it authentically because you think it's going to provide benefits. So that's fine. But they want, they do put a little screener on the information you have. So the more you can bring in, make me smarter type of information, like what you just said, Samantha, that really builds a story for them, builds a journey for them, builds an exploration for them on your own website. That's a great thing. I know for us at Tableau and other products that I've worked on, free trials, accounts, product demos, user reviews, I mean, those were like gold to us. Definitely gold. I mean, even in the early days when we were just a small company, the free trial was the thing. And we would talk about, getting people to somehow to experience Tableau. We had a thing called the Tableau experience. And in the early days, it was easy to get not easy, but users would try it. But as we scaled and companies scaled and bigger enterprises, it's less likely that a VP of IT or even a head of some group is not going to try it. So how do we give them the experience of what it's going to be like to use? And so it's the product demos, it's stratifying user reviews and comments by the type of persona so that you can recognize yourself when you visit those websites. Oh, I'm a marketer at a mid-sized company. What do other marketers at mid-sized companies think about this product? That kind of thing. So I find all of those things just the most powerful elements in your arsenal, but then to strategically aim people at the pieces, the use cases, the personas that are most relevant to the visitors you're seeing is super important, because then they'll find themselves, they'll find themselves and say, oh, okay, I get it. I get the experience. I've touched it. I've tasted it, and it's for me. I get how it's for me. I think that's a really important part of all of these influential, trusted sources, is making sure that you're delivering it to the persona and the use case that's coming in through the door.
One of the things, Renee, that you mentioned, to just quickly touch on that I think is really important. You mentioned that we hold the demo, right? We don't want to let people have it. I think there's two reasons we do that. One is our most expensive resources, you typically do the demos, right? Our most experienced and expensive, I don't mean necessarily by salary, but time, right? Their time is very, very precious and limited. So we feel like people have to get to a threshold. The other thing is, I think we're afraid that we're not going to show them something they want. But if we understand our buyers and we've done our homework and we really know what matters to them, we should be able to tease them. I'm not talking about like a walkthrough that's personalized, but we should be able to tease them with something that gets their attention, that makes them say, yes, now I want to take an hour to spend with you.
Yeah. We actually got to the point where we had the free trials, we had the explainer videos, we had the demo videos, we had free training videos that you could watch that would also be a way. We even got to the point where we started doing scheduled live demos, all the, at different times in the day, and for different audiences. So because it just got to the point where, okay, you know what, let's show what the product can do. Scheduling it, getting on people's calendars made it something that they felt like they had to show up for, in addition to the pre-recorded on-demand stuff. So it's just people do want to taste and touch your product, as you said, Samantha, and getting people there, using your resources effectively. It is expensive to put a demo out there, and it is expensive to put even a free trial out there if your product is kind of hard to get started with. So you really have to enable people on this experience that they want to have. It takes a lot, but it's worth doing, because obviously it's the most trusted, most influential set of things people can do.
Yeah, there was a question in chat about whether this is sort of just a high touch ABM strategy or it can be mass market. No, I very much think it can be mass market. To give a couple of examples, we've worked for the last few years with a security vendor called Alien Vault, who's done a fantastic job of not just building, and they're very much a transactional high velocity products. They've done a fantastic job of building a strong online review presence. They have trial options on their site, but then they also bring in dynamic review quote syndication on trial pages. They've seen a 43% improvement on conversion of traffic to trial by having that social proof on that page. Work with another brand called Veeam in the backup and recovery space, again, a fast moving product, where they've seen a 6x improvement on lead conversion on their request to demo page by having that dynamic social proof on that page. Conversion went from 2 to 12%. On core information pages, we've seen that bringing in the right social proof in the form of like a carousel onto a page can make a big difference. The cloud team at IBM incorporates a review syndication widget, and they've seen a 30% improvement in engagement on that page and on scroll depth, and they're getting people to spend a third more time with their brand, which is incredibly important. Also, what we're finding is that bringing social proof into your page helps with SEO. We work with an IT infrastructure monitoring company that has seen about 15% more traffic to the pages where they've brought customer-oriented social proof. And to your point, Alyssa, it's so much more important to put stories people can relate to. I've seen a tendency to put just a big brand logo on a page or a quote from a big executive, and that's all well and good and shows you that shows the world that you work with big brands, but are they relatable? If I'm at a regional company or at a hospital or a different kind of institution, I want to find people I can relate to. And so it's all about that, stories from people just like me.
Mhm. Yeah, you got to show that. Everybody wants to show the big logos and there's a certain credibility and attention, but you
Mhm.
got to tell the story, man. You got to tell the story because, anybody can get a logo. And I even say to people like, people, it's sure enterprises buy ROI, but people buy results because it reflects on them and their teams. So make sure you take it from just this generic quote about high ROI, blah, 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 to like, what did you deliver? How did you make people's lives better? How can you make this almost an emotional connection, human to human? The more the reviews bring that into it, they just pop off the screen. They just make a lot more sense. And again, part of that is knowing your audience and knowing what's going to move them. Everybody loves a high ROI, but it's a pretty abstract concept. So bring it down to where your buyers are, not down, but bring it to where your buyers are, because the kind of results they're looking for, the performance they're looking for, and just make it personal, make it pop off the screen, because that's what I'm doing. When I'm reading a review, I'm reading a person telling me a story, and I want to know what happened to that person and that story.
I got promoted because I implemented this piece of technology. That's personal, right?
Yes, exactly.
Let's talk about just a little bit more on the review concept. So a lot of times people think of reviews as just sort of this transactional thing that people go and visit when they're doing a search online. As we've talked about, high quality content, and I delineate between kind of the short, shallow review and sort of the high quality of the review. The high quality reviews can get embedded into your own channels and again, help with conversion, help with engagement, help with sales. We're also learning for the first time in the survey just about how reviews get shared. 12% of the buyers who used reviews said that they shared them with 10 people, 45% 4 people, and 92% at least with their kind of buying committee. Does this surprise you, or does this sort of, again, kind of ring true with you in terms of the amplification effects of this type of social proof?
To me, this rings true. I think social over the years people have gotten to be more shareable, more sharing, but there's a large share of voice that goes along with a small group of people doing a lot of sharing. They become influencers or micro influencers or what have you. But nonetheless, despite that there are a small number of people doing a ton of sharing, there are a bunch of people doing casual sharing or second order sharing or even third order sharing, like that 92% of buyers share it with collaborators. Probably can't even track that. You can't even know that exists, but it does exist. People talk. And in fact, when I would talk about the Tableau community, I would talk about the first order community that was active and engaged with us. But I knew there was a second order community, a second order set of users, and even a third order that we should consider them part of our community, part of our customer base, even though we may never know their names and never see them. We know they're either using it or they're talking about it or they're receiving it. And that's the same thing with your reviews. Your reviews are having an outsized effect over what you see is actually happening. So if you see, what is that, 57% of some sharing going on, there's actually many more people talking about your reviews than you think. And I think that's in general true with social, but particularly reviews that help them make decisions about really important things that they're going to buy that are going to change their business lives. So yeah, I think this totally makes sense. I don't know, Samantha, how about for you? Does that make sense to you?
I think it makes sense. And I'm actually thinking about a conversation I had last week with a sales team, and they had an opportunity. They've been working it for a long time. They had a champion that absolutely was going with them. And out of left field, somebody on the buying committee, 3 layers deep, right, but influential in their own way, came around and said, "Hey, I went and saw the reviews, and they sent these 3 bad reviews, and it halted everything, right? All of a sudden, it changed the trajectory of the conversation." So I think there's a couple things going on. I think it's people who are going out and looking for validation for their opinions or their gut instincts or things that might be off, or maybe they're being sold better by a competitor and sort of trying to insert through other folks. I also think that these are now standard part of a business case submission. So now when you submit a business case for approval, I think reviews are just part of it. They just if you don't submit it, it's like, well, what's wrong? Are there no reviews? What does that say, right? And sometimes there's brand new technology that hasn't been in market enough to establish, but most of us sell things that are in market for some period of time. And so I think it's not surprising to see this happening, and I don't see that going away anytime soon. I think it's here to stay.
Agreed.
We have a really interesting question that came in. Any tips on how to offer a demo when your software is very configurable and we might look or behave differently from one customer to the next? We've always avoided doing so because the setup for one person might scare another away. We usually hand configure the software to meet the prospect's needs before doing a screen share demo. Any kind of reactions or advice?
Every day I have this conversation with someone. Stop being afraid because your buyers aren't. They're smarter than that. They are capable of understanding that this is for someone else.
Yes.
And so the best way for me to do this is take the things you know best. Show a customer scenario. Have your customer demo what's important to them. Our buyers are smart. They understand what configuration means.
Yeah.
This is the biggest obstacle, I think, to getting on the short list that people put in front of buyers. They get frustrated because they just want to taste it. They know you can do more. You're really not going to scare them away.
I agree. People are, especially if you're on the early stages of growth, before you really hit the fast mass market, people are pretty good about being imaginative. I remember we used to do a lot of demos with a data set called Coffee Chain, and it was coffee sales. I mean, I live in Seattle, so it made a lot of sense. But we would demo it to banks and healthcare companies, and imagine you run a retail chain of coffee shops, across the nation, and people be like, okay, I can imagine that. So if it's a relatable scenario in some way, then you can help. Many buyers can use their imaginations. Maybe not everyone in the buying group can, but many can, and it might be just enough for you to qualify them into a super customized demo. As opposed to having to start with the super customized demo. So Samantha, you're so right. Don't be afraid. Try it, give it a go. Find the scenarios that are the most familiar to people, the most relatable to them, even if they're outside their industry or outside their exact use case, or even outside their use case. We've all been sold and marketed to. And so we've all used products in different scenarios. So probably a lot of your prospects have enough imagination to be able to get past having to have a super customizable demo. Now, there's going to come a time in the buyer's journey, where absolutely you need to configure the perfect demo, the right scenario, the right people are in the room. You can't waste any of their time trying to get them to imagine. But in the early days when they're screening, that's the time when you could revert to a more generic style demo.
So, it's kind of like Elon Musk showing the Tesla Cybertruck up front. That's not actually the truck you're going to be driving at the end of the day, but it's about getting the excitement and getting people kind of fired up about the potential and the promise. I don't know if that's a good or a bad analogy. There was another question that came in. I'm not sure how we can answer this, but any tips on what target audiences, personas to target within enterprise, medium, and small businesses? I mean, I would think that's highly contextual to your business, but Samantha or Alyssa, any guidance there?
So it's impossible to answer without knowing anything about the actual business. But what I can say is that, personas are getting a bad rap these days because, it's all about personalization, individuals, but those two things have to play. Personas build a hypothesis upon which you can personalize and hypothesize, and you have to have groups of people that you can appeal to. So my advice is always start by talking to your current fabulous, profitable customers. Find out who's involved in the buying process, and then go talk to more of those type of people who don't know you and look for patterns. And you don't have to talk to thousands of people or hundreds of people. If you talk to 5 people that share some commonalities, you'll know if there's patterns or not. And so I feel very strongly about this stuff, and I have loads and loads of information. If they want to follow up, I'm happy to point them in the right direction towards some things. But they are important, and they are a place for us to start. And without them, we actually can't get our heads around how we go to market.
Yeah, I agree. It's segmentation and personas. I mean, they're just useful. I mean, they're fundamentally useful. And I get hey, we need to highly personalize. Yes, but you've got to have some tracks by which you can personalize. And so I think that's just a smart way to think about it. I mean, but it does highly depend on your company. I see that FinTech is the industry here. I think in particularly in FinTech, or particularly in any large enterprise, there's a tendency to want to shoot super high early on, because God, if we can get into the C-level office or whatever, or an SVP or an EVP, and he pushes or she pushes it down, they're going to just take it, right? But that's just not really how it happens. In fact, in a lot of ways, you kind of you have to win the masses. You have to win the hearts of the masses in a lot of respects. So a lot of your demos and your product demos, you got to show how this is going to, again, going to the person, how's this going to change their life? How's it going to make their life better? And a lot of times it really is the people doing the work that you need to do. So it might be a manager of IT or a director of IT, as opposed to the EVP of IT, shooting high like that. Now you have to aim at both, actually, because the EVP of IT or the EVP of whatever group, sales, has some really high level business targets and business objectives that they need to achieve. And if you can talk that talk and walk that walk and show what you can achieve, great. Now, demos usually are not necessarily the way to open the door there, right? That's not the way to open the door with those folks there. So you really have to think about what you're trying to accomplish, what you're trying to sell, and where your product really delivers. Again, it's about showing, like, what are you going to get out of this? You, the person you're talking to. So I think you really have to dig deeply, talk to a lot of people, just like Samantha says, and really understand how the prospect's journey works, the buyer's journey works, and how the many different buyers at a particular organization intersect and collaborate and actually diverge too. So it's a pretty tough one. So it's a good question, though. It's a great question.
So just to summarize on sources, and then we're going to transition to a discussion on self-serve, because I think we're getting a lot of questions on this whole topic of self-serve. Top 5 information sources used by buyers: user reviews, the vendor representative, trials and accounts, demos and product websites. The top 5 tactics used by vendors: their own marketing collateral, case studies, references, demos, and product websites. What you see at the center of the Venn diagram is where there's intersect, where there is alignment. Where you see the outside circles is where there is an emphasis difference, that vendors still putting a lot of emphasis into internally generated collateral and case studies and gated references, maybe missing the mark versus thinking about that trial, self-guided demo strategy for the customer, a proactive user review strategy, and maybe training vendor representatives in the most effective way possible to tell the story in the eyes of the customer. So I'm going to move now, just for time, on to the next topic, which is self-serve. And we've already, again, had a lot of questions come in on this, but in our survey, 87% of buyers said they wanted some kind of self-serve option, whereas the number of vendors who are really strategically thinking about self-serve today, frankly, is lagging. Alyssa, would love to just kind of get your high-level reactions to this data. And, in planning for this webinar, we had some really interesting conversations around, is it self-serve or is it control?
Yeah, I definitely am a big believer that the rising demand for self-serve is a little bit because, I want to control my journey. I want to control my prospect journey, my buyer's journey. And you know what? It's just like, it's kind of like when you sometimes you say, oh, geez, explaining this or trying to get this person to do what I want, I'll just do it myself. You don't often choose self-serve because you want to self-serve. You choose self-serve because it's the best way to get what you want, which you want the control to do it. So I think this is a real opportunity for companies to think about self-serve as a way of enabling control. That the buyer needs control. And the reason why you hear a lot of self-serve is they're just kind of, maybe many of them have given up on trying to, you're being useful to them. They're just like, it's like rich people, they don't like going up to the buffet and self-serving. They have servants that they pay to do exactly what they want because it's control. You know what I mean? So I don't want to draw too many weird analogies, but I really do believe that if you think about it as control, the buyer wants control of the journey. That means you can help them. You can help them. I mean, you want to control it too, but you can mutually control it. You can actually help them achieve what they want to achieve and know and be informed about while you're doing what you need to do. So if you start thinking about it as, how can we enable control? You're going to do a better job of using your resources, like your salespeople, who you would say, well, self-serve, let's get salespeople out of the way. No, a vendor representative we just saw can be super useful if that vendor representative helps me to have control over this journey that I need to have control over. So I'm a big believer in self-serve, but I like the patina of, how are you enabling them to have the control they need? Because now you can use all your resources to enable that control. I'm not saying abdicate your responsibility or your control of it. I'm just saying people want to have control, help them have control of the journey, because I bet you money that it might enable you to have higher sales that close faster.
Samantha, what would you like to add?
Alyssa, you're spot on. It really is about that. I think we as teams, we're just so, we want to control the process so much, just in general, that we throw up unnecessary barriers. The reason they don't want to talk to a salesperson to get pricing is because I got to talk to a salesperson, and you want to ask me 5,000 questions and you're going to pre-qualify me. I just want to know if we're in the ballpark before I waste your time or my time, right? Yep. That's an easy example, and a very common one that happens quite a lot. And we don't have to put barriers up to have it. The other thing that I'll just comment on is, Alyssa touched on this, is really important. Self-service does not mean no humans. And we confuse those two things, and we put them in there. If I have a salesperson at this one company, well, they're not, the company sort of doesn't exist anymore. They were bought 3 times, all the cycles. So I won't name them out. But I would immediately just call them, because I'm like, I need this, this, and this, and they would just give me this, this, and this, and we don't have to go through a charade, and I don't have to go through 15 pages to do it. So it is about control and preference and channel, and a low demand on the buyer. What they really don't want is to have to be screened to get the information. And if we could lead with that understanding and build the rapport, I think that's the cry. When I talk to buyers and I interview them, that's what I really hear. They actually want somebody to call to go do the work for them. Yes, just to put the barriers up when they make that call.
Exactly. Don't make it harder for me to work with you than to work without you. That's really what it is. The whole idea of, I'll just do it myself. Just think about that when you're trying to delegate something, how frustrating that is to the people you're delegating to, or you're getting delegated to. It's the same thing. Oh my God, I'll just do it myself. It's not out of a happy place when you're just saying, you want to walk away from that. It's because you're frustrated. So think of it as like, how can I do exactly what you just said, Samantha? How can I not friction this? How can I not put up barriers? How can I not make this harder? How can I make it easier for them? That will definitely feel way better and faster and smoother, and probably lead to greater success.
And I think it's about profoundly understanding what the buyer really wants at a different stage of the journey. When they're asking for a high-level demo early on, it's simply that. They're not looking for that highly configured specs, perfect demo. They want to get a high-level sense as to whether the product is a good fit for them. When they ask for a reference, this is my favorite one, and one of the reasons I started TrustRadius, the whole idea that, oh no, you can't speak to a customer. They are a precious resource. We're going to gate them until you're qualified in the sales process. Well, maybe I don't actually need to speak to a customer, but I just want to hear from a customer in some way. Maybe I want to read a story that sounds like me. So give me the assurance and the comfort that I'm not wasting my time if I engage with you. So I think, sometimes it's too easy to be dismissive when we hear, I want to speak to a customer, I want to see a demo, but really digging down and trying to answer, what is the buyer trying to answer at that phase of the question? Can you satiate that need? We had a question come in. What should be the important distinguishing factor for small companies when they fight out big ones? And then fully managed versus self-served, which one should we promote more? Should we maintain transparency and show our pricing, or customize according to the customer needs? So quite a lot in there. I think 3 questions in one. Either one of you want to take any element of that?
Well, on the pricing factor, Samantha, you mentioned that. It's just so true that, God, really, do I have to, I just want to know, am I in the ballpark to start, right? I don't need to know your entire pricing model. And it is challenging because people don't want to list their prices, because you don't want to leave, money on the table, and you don't want to imply something different, or you don't want to price yourself out of the market. So I think it's like the way that the more transparent, or the more you can give sort of the ballpark, and be upfront about that, even in a self-serve way, is useful, because it's an important piece of information. So I would say that's an area really to work on, is how can you be more transparent about pricing to give people just what they're asking for, which is ballpark it for me. Are we in the same arena, even in the same parking lot? Give it to me, just tell me, because that's gonna help people decide whether to continue or not. You need to do that in a way that shows your value, of course, like this is an investment worth making. But I think that's one of the challenges. But I'm definitely a proponent of, like, hey, get out there with your pricing. You don't have to spill your entire pricing model. You don't have to, have a calculator that, calculates exactly, because, there's going to be discounting that happens. You might have a scenario based pricing model, or scenarios. Companies like yours often look like this, or companies of this size do this, but I think pricing is a pretty big, element that creates a lot of friction. And that frustration as well, that doesn't need to happen. So I for sure. I don't know, Samantha, you obviously.
Yeah, I agree with you on pricing. We're not fooling anybody what our pricing is. What you're doing is losing the opportunity to settle agreements. So some people think you're too expensive, and you're actually might not be. Some people think that, they have a $10,000 budget and you're $500,000. Why are you going to spend time? Like, don't waste your time on that. You're not a good fit, and that's okay. Like, we have to be okay with those types of things. The other thing that I'll mention, I think part of the question, if I caught you correctly, Vinay, was around, hey, if we're a small fish and we're going after the Goliath. And by the way, that has been some of my favorite work ever, right? When we launched Netezza, for example, and we were going after Teradata, and we didn't have any customers yet and all of that. Like, I love that, right? There's so much there. The reality in those situations is what you have to focus on is not how I'm going to get 1,000 customers, is how I'm going to get my first 10. And if you spend all your time with that, you've got to find the right type of buyers who have a problem that you can solve, but are also open and adaptable and like to be early adopters. And that's really a real thing. Yeah. And you've got to and if you spend your time focusing on that and that delivery, so what's the right delivery method? I can't tell you if it's SaaS or embedded, because it depends on your service and who your ideal early adopters are. But what I can tell you is that you need to learn throughout that whole process. So A, I focus on who I want, and then B, how do I learn every single thing about what they're using, what they're not using, why? So sometimes SaaS is helpful there because you can see what's actually being used in the product, but you may have something that it's just not the right delivery method. So, you kind of have to go after it, but focus and learn in everything. Those first 10 people should know they're the first 10, and they should be doing this with you. Not directing at them.
That's brilliant, Samantha. I 100% agree. In fact, I was talking to a company I advise, and we were talking about scaling marketing, and they're not at the stage where they need to scale marketing yet because they don't have those first 10. So I was like, look, you got to go out there and just get the first 10, whatever it takes. And it's usually up to the C-level, the CEO often is the guy who gets out there and sells the first 10, or the person who gets out there and sells the first 10. So definitely super important. It depends on your stage, but get a really deep understanding, get those customers who are so embedded into your journey that they're practically like full-on partners. And the danger is you over customize to those few, but if by getting more than a few, getting 5, 10, you start to see trends across companies, and you'll focus on where, hey, this is where we make a big difference. This is where we take a swing and we get our customers, the grand slam home run. It's not over in this space, it's over here. So those first 10 are the most important in terms of small companies fighting off the big guys, giving again, getting in bed with a company that has exactly what you said. It's almost a psychographic. There are firms who value innovation and they want innovation. Finding those innovative companies with budgets, they can be any size, but there are a lot of large companies that have a real thirst for innovation. Finding those companies and then getting in with them and partnering with them to deliver exactly the results they're looking for is a huge opportunity. It's a huge opportunity, but you're right. There are companies seeking innovation, and find those companies. If you're small, find those companies because they'll be far more open to you.
And by the way, you might be big launching a new product to a new market segment, and the same principle applies. You may have some additional cash, you may have some different things, but I'll remember the days when I was at SAP and we had a small business product, and I promise you, going into golf shops and small retailers and trying to convince them they could have SAP was a really difficult challenge because they knew us, of course, but they knew us as something not for them. And so we had to treat it the same way. We had to convince them that we had a solution for them. So whether it's a new market segment or things, you've got to just get there. And by the way, there hasn't been a product that I've been involved with where how users use it wasn't slightly different than we anticipated. And that is healthy and it is good. Let our community tell us where the value lies. We may have spent 3 years building one feature and spent too much building another, but the 2-month feature is the thing that they love. Fine. let it
Go
be,
with it.
right?
Yeah, go with it.
Go
Right.
with that.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Let them tell you what really, really matters to them.
So changing topics now, want to start to talk about intent data and just the role that it plays today. Alyssa, you were recently, I think, on a conference where you talked about how it's so much harder these days to qualify buyers,
Yeah.
right? You know, I mean, you don't have those face-to-face interactions in sales. You don't meet people at events anymore, and it's really hard to delineate between the tire kickers and the real buyers. Intent data is a way to get visibility into the funnel. There's a lot of dark funnel, as some people might say out there, where you don't have visibility into what's going on. You know, Serious Decisions talks about how 50 to 60% of the buyer's journey was done before they actually sort of engage with a sales representative. They're doing a lot of research online, on the vendor site, on independent sources. And we've talked about the importance of making sure that your vendor site is effective and gives the social proof that you need, and that you're well represented on other platforms like TrustRadius, where your buyers go to. But intent data is a mechanism to get some visibility. I know that you recently joined the board of Cumulo, so I took the liberty of sharing this example of how Coca-Cola is evaluating them right now and comparing them to Dell. So there are a couple of insights there. One is, maybe this is a prospect they're not yet talking to. Maybe it is a prospect that they're engaged to, but they don't know exactly who their competition is and which way it's leaning. Intent data, at least the type of intent data that we provide, gives you visibility to answer those two questions. And this data can obviously be used for new business generation, but also for retention as well. Now, both of you, I'm sure, work with a lot of brands who are experimenting in this area of intent data, but we'd just love to hear from you in terms of, where it plays a role, why it's necessary today, if it is necessary, and what advice do you have?
Well, I think intent data is incredible. I mean, I'm on the older edge of Gen X, or maybe the younger end of baby boomers. Well, I won't say any more about that. So one of my first jobs in marketing technology was actually helping direct mailers. And in those, you don't get as much direct mail as you used to get. You still get it. When it's not targeted, it's junk mail, right? When it's not of interest to you, it's junk mail. But when it's interesting to you, then it's useful, right? And I think of intent data as the same way. Like when we use intent data effectively, you're basically talking to people who are interested. And so any kind of marketing message, sales message, or information you share with them is actually useful. It's when you're spamming people with messages and content and stuff that they just aren't interested in or don't care about. That's when it's spam. That's when it's frustrating and gross. So I love intent data for the purpose of, like, I know I'm talking to people who are interested. So like in this example, Coca-Cola Enterprises with Cumulo, looking at Cumulo or Dell. I mean, obviously, if Cumulo approaches people at Coca-Cola Enterprises, they're going to have some interest in it. It's hard to find the right people, but you definitely have an indication that something's going on. If anything, the thing I wish with the intent data is that it was even more widely available, even more sources coming in, because you're actually serving your customers and your prospects better when you focus on people who are interested. Because they're interested, they want to know what you've got to say. So why wouldn't you want to talk to them, and why wouldn't they want to talk to you? Now, I'm not saying everybody does, but it definitely increases your odds. So I think intent data is a really valuable thing to be exploring and using. A lot of the applications are, of course, in account-based marketing, because that's where you see lots of intent data, lots of activity, lots of traction, lots of momentum. But there are other ways to use intent data to find new markets, new segments, new opportunities, new products, new competitors coming up. I mean, it's really useful source of data. And I'd encourage, if people aren't sure about it or aren't working with it yet, do some experimenting and learn some of the stories and the case studies, or the scenarios of what the use cases of what the applications could be, because I think it's a really useful thing. I know, Samantha, I mean, you probably have a lot of clients also exploring and using.
Yeah, absolutely. And I totally agree with everything you said. And I think there's two other components of it that I see a lot. So one of those components is people are always trying to scale intent data. And that actually is its biggest downfall and fault. Because when you try and aggregate up to, I want to find, so a lot of times it's in the hands of the demand gen team, and they're measured by volumes of activity. But intent data breaks down. If you try and make it too big, it doesn't work anymore. It actually needs to be specific.
Yes.
And so if I sell email security software, just knowing somebody's looking for security doesn't do anything for me, right? It doesn't give me any signal worth having. And so I think marketers need to really train the brain differently on intent data. For most products, there are some products that scale makes sense. So I think that's one thing. And then the second thing is, what do you now do with the information now that I have it? If all you're going to do is put them in my generic nurture stream to every contact in my database, we've lost the opportunity to use intent data in the way that makes sense. So those are just a couple things I would, recommend people think about. I'm a huge fan of it. I think it can be incredibly valuable. And as Alyssa said, not just from an individual account scoring standpoint, but also from a trending standpoint. Who are we most being compared to, right? What does that tell us that that's happening? Are we being compared to the right places? Maybe we're not. And then we have some brand work to do, right? To reestablish, right? Those kinds of things. So we can't just rely on what comes to our websites and what we interact with. So much of what people learn happens in other places. This is an unbelievably valuable way to tap into it.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I have an old boss that used to say all buyers are liars if you tried to survey them. But if you use their behavior data, that's really what they're doing. And intent data is that bigger view into their intent. I mean, you've got your website, so yeah, there's a certain amount of intent data there, but it's such a small fraction of what they're experiencing. And intent data can just open your eyes to how much more. Your point about like, wow, look at who they're comparing us to. That is completely not our competitive set. We got brand work to do. That's really valuable. You won't figure that out from your own website, and you might not even figure it out from surveys, and you might not even figure it out from 10 or 20 qualitative interviews you might do. Or even talking to salespeople. Intent data can be just an incredibly eye-opening set of data that can just change your perspective on a lot of things. Although, and I think your point about scale is a really good one, because it is pretty sparse, or not sparse. I guess I don't know what the word is, but it's very specialized. It's really special data. Don't think it's going to turn into everything, every answer, but it has a lot of answers in it.
I mean, I'm going to say something really unpopular now, but I think we all need to hear it, which is that some of the worst source of information about the market is our salespeople. And it's not because they're evil, or they're hugely intelligent and they have really important dialogue. And there's pieces of things that you can get from the salespeople that are instrumental, but fundamentally they have a very specific kind of relationship with the buyer. And we are often way too dependent on a salesperson interpretation of the market. And we base all of our decisions on that. And this kind of data can balance it and give us a much broader perspective.
Amen to that. Amen to that. And I'll just add to that, like I always tell my marketers that I work with, go have your own conversations with customers. A marketer who knows a few customers, talks to customers, is a more valuable marketer. You can, listen to sales, definitely, but it's a perspective. You're right. They have a particular screen on, a particular filter on. So get out there and know your customers. And intent data is a great way to start having those kind of conversations, for sure.
I want to echo something you said, Samantha, about you got to kind of break the rules in your thinking. So one of the mistakes that I've seen people do is they get an intent data population and they run ads against it, but they use the same generic ads they might use for normal ICP-based advertising. And one of the things, at least when we provide someone category intent, here are all the people in your category searching for products. Those people are looking for products like yours. They may not be familiar with your brand, so you need to kind of use a different ad strategy. Secondly, willingness to pay. You might spend $8 for a click for a general Google, search ad, or less than that for a display ad. But when you actually have the ability to direct your ad at someone who has real purchase intent, your willingness to spend should go way up on that ad as well, because those people are just going to convert so much better. But the rubrics aren't yet written for what to spend in these scenarios. They need to be rewritten and rethought. But just to go through a few of the use cases we're seeing people enumerate: prospecting, feeding it to your sales team, your BDR team; sales enablement. I'm in an active deal. I want to know who my competition is. I want to know if they're tire kicking or real. I want to know if I'm winning or losing. Targeting high intent accounts, ABM, digital marketing. We're now seeing companies feed this data into tools like Demandbase and 6sense and run ad campaigns against it. Retargeting, Retention is really interesting. The team at IBM Cloud fed our intent data to their account management team, and they were able to early intervene with at-risk accounts. They were able to spot cross-sell opportunities. They took their net retention rate up from 100 to 122%. Pretty phenomenal results. Again, I think people often overlook the retention and account growth side of things. We did have a question that came in. I don't know if it specifically pertains to intent. Any tips from the panel on navigating expansion within organizations when new use cases apply to other departments and the existing buyer doesn't have much of an incentive or relationship with the other potential department to sell a use case for the software?
That's a good one. Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, yeah, and you know, it's something that you think, oh boy, yeah, I get into this account, I'm gonna get all kinds of referrals, and it just doesn't always happen. I mean, you're gonna have to work it. I mean, you're gonna have to work it, but it's gonna be credible that you already have a use case in the organization, that the software, the application, the tech has already landed there and is already in use. It's gonna make a huge difference. So don't think of it so much as like, woohoo, man, expansion is easy, especially into new departments or new areas. You know, expanding within an area, that's like you can show a lot of value and they just keep buying more. But finding new areas it's almost like you do have to kind of think of it as like a slightly softer road, a slightly easier row to hoe, so to speak, than a cold prospect. But it's still going to be work. There's not a lot of incentive for people to do that. Now, there are people who are connectors within organizations. And so finding that kind of champion or finding that kind of connector who is the kind of person that wants to share is a valuable thing to do. And I think the more useful you are, the more you make them heroes, the more attention you get them, the more kudos they get. Other people see that attention, other people see that success, and they say, how did you do that? I'd like to do that too. So in a lot of ways, put yourself in the shoes of the person that is your customer and trying to make them be more successful and more known and more people being more aware of their success, because people around them, even in other departments, you know, nearby departments, might see that and say, wow, how's that person doing that? Again, a little bit of what's in it for me, it's personal. That can create conversations. So I would say, be aware that it's not just an easy sale to just, you know, cross into a new department, but that you can leverage it. And it's often by helping your existing customer and your existing champion be more successful, get them attention, you know, and sometimes that's public attention, putting a case study out there, a press release, getting an article placed, doing some social around them. Everybody wants to advance in their career. So if they start to see someone using your product in one couple cubicles over in the old fashioned world, they might actually ask, hey, yeah, how are you doing that? That's pretty cool. Can we do that in my department? So I'd say those are two things that I would pay attention to. Samantha, you probably have some more ideas.
At least you're totally right. I like to think of it as, I don't think of them as the intro. I think of them as helping the back end. So I'm already a vendor in the system. Oh, yes. You're trustworthy. You've had a good experience with us. They're not going to get you in front of that audience, but once you're in front of them and they're considering you, having that person could be really invaluable in that process. And all the things you said about, you know, giving them awards and case studies and things, because they're going to naturally share in their own organization. 100% agree with that. It's spot on.
Well, we are at the top of the hour. I want to thank Alyssa and Samantha for their generous insights and for this great conversation. If you do nothing else, tailor your marketing to the millennials, the new majority. Invest in those resources that buyers actually trust. And that includes your own website, but bring in that social proof and those demo capabilities to it. Embrace self-service, don't run away from it, but answer the questions that your buyers are trying to answer. Give them that control, enable it, and realize your salespeople can be part of that solution. And then think about intent data. It's a really fantastic new strategic avenue. Again, thank you, Samantha. Thank you, Alyssa, for a fantastic conversation today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We will send out a recording.